Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're diving into the dark, twisted world of stalkers, those unseen forces that haunt our lives, waiting in the shadows. These stories aren't just about someone following you. They're about something darker, something that should have never been disturbed. From messages left in the dead of night to eerie occurrences that defy logic, get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true stalker horror stories that will make you question how far the darkness can reach. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. I moved into the row house on Pinckney Street out of desperation, not desire. It was early October, and the trees were shedding their leaves like old secrets. The apartment was cheap by Beacon Hill standards, too cheap. The realtor, a twitchy fellow with pale eyes, had mentioned something vague about history and character. I should have known then. I had dropped out of Harvard that spring, not due to grades, but because of something harder to explain, an unease that grew louder with every lecture hall. Every passing face, every whisper in the library, my mind had begun to fray, and I believed a new place would stitch it back together. The apartment was dimly lit, its walls thick and swollen with age. The air carried a smell that no amount of Lysol could kill, an earthy rot, like old teeth in a jar of formaldehyde. But the place was mine, and I welcomed the solitude. For the first week, nothing happened, at least nothing I could clearly identify. A creak here, a groan there. I told myself it was the bones of the house settling in the autumn chill. But on the 8th night, I heard it. Footsteps above me. Not rodents. Not the clatter of branches. Footsteps, slow, dragging, deliberate. I froze in bed, listening as they made their way across the attic floorboards directly over my head. I checked. The next morning, the attic entrance was in the hallway, above the last step. I fetched a broom and nudged open the hatch. A sour wind met my face. I pulled the attic ladder down and climbed cautiously upward, flashlight in hand. The attic was empty. Absolutely. Immaculately and unnaturally empty. The floorboards were nailed shut from the inside. That night I couldn't sleep. At 3:11 a.m., I heard it again, the slow steps. I held my breath. This time they stopped directly above me, then a low, wet sound, like breath from a mouth that didn't belong to any human. The next day I called the landlord. He claimed the attic was sealed decades ago. He sounded uneasy, hurried. "It's just the pipes," he said, and hung up. The police came after I insisted. They searched, found nothing. They shone lights up in the attic, tapped walls, inspected floorboards. One officer gave me a strange look when he noticed my bookshelf. "You read Ekthros Mythos?" he asked. I told him I didn't. He nodded and said nothing more. That night, I found the first note. It was slid under my door, written in ink that smelled like rust and time. The parchment was brittle, edges curled like burnt paper. The handwriting was archaic, looped, and uneven. It read, "He waits between thoughts. He slumbers in the hush between heartbeats. Do not remember him, for he remembers you too deeply." I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Something had been stirred. From that night forward, I heard the movements more frequently, always at night, always slow, like something pacing in an endless pattern. But worse than the sound was the feeling, like something watching from behind the walls of thought, just behind your reflection in a mirror, waiting for you to blink. I began to explore the apartment obsessively. In the back of the hallway closet, behind loose paneling, I found a small wooden box. Inside were journals, old and yellowed, dating back to 1901. Every one of them was written by former tenants, and everyone described the same thing: a presence in the attic. Notes appearing from nowhere, breathing that wasn't quite human, a figure seen only from the corner of the eye, but always hunched and faceless like a man made from wet bark. The most recent entry from 1992 ended mid-sentence. I've nailed the attic shut again. He's too close now. Last night I dreamed I was inside his thoughts, and there was the rest was scratched out. I took the journals to a professor of folklore at Emerson College. She read them with trembling hands. "This isn't just urban legend," she whispered. "You're describing a type of thought parasite, an idea that clings like mold on wet cloth. In myth, he's called Twagnall, the one who burrows, not into homes, but into minds. Once remembered, he returns." I asked what to do. She looked at me for a long time and said, "Forget, before it's too late." But it was already too late. The final days were a blur. The breathing grew louder, the footsteps closer. I stopped sleeping entirely. The floorboards above me began to pulse, not creak, but pulse, as if something beneath them had a heartbeat. At night I saw shapes on the ceiling. A man-shaped shadow with no face. Something not made of flesh, but of memory. I tried to move out, but the house wouldn't let me. I'd pack, and hours later, find myself still in bed, staring at the attic. My calls wouldn't connect. My friends no longer answered. My reflections started lagging. My thoughts weren't mine. And then the final note came. It was etched onto my bathroom mirror in that same archaic hand. "You remembered. You brought him back. Now you are the attic." This manuscript was found on the floor of the Pinckney Street residence in early 2023 after a wellness check was requested by neighbors. There was no sign of the tenant. The attic was found open for the first time in decades. Inside it, nailed to the beams, were dozens of notes, written in different hands, spanning over a century. All of them ended with the same words: "He waits beneath the floorboards." I first encountered her gaze, not her face, but her gaze in the bathroom mirror of my apartment on Hawthorne Street. It was a gray, rain-sick March afternoon when the first note arrived. Folded neatly in the mailbox, no envelope, no return. Address: the paper was thick and fibrous, like something made before factories, and smelled faintly of ash. In spidery handwriting it read, "Do not look into any mirror after sunset, not even for a second. Especially not alone." I laughed, tossed it into the trash. Portland was full of eccentrics. A cranky artist, a failed playwright, some lunatic with too much time. But that night, as I brushed my teeth, something strange happened. My reflection blinked. A moment after I did, not before, not with. After that, I stared. My reflection stared back. Then smiled. I wasn't smiling. The next day, I convinced myself I'd been tired. A trick of light. Stress hallucinations, maybe. I worked for an indie publishing house notorious for long hours and unpaid overtime. Still, when the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself avoiding mirrors. I dressed with the lights off, brushed my teeth facing the wall. I laughed at myself. In the dark, but not too loud. And not for long, a second note arrived the next morning, slid under my door this time. "She is drawn to self-observers. Do not look. She remembers who looks. She lives in the echo." Who she was, I didn't know. But from that moment, I became aware of every reflective surface: bathroom mirrors, glass picture frames, the black screen of my phone. And worse, I began to see things. In store windows, I would catch a shape behind me. A tall, veiled woman, with long hair, her hands pressed gently against the inside of the glass, always still, always silent. But when I turned around, there was no one. I told my coworker Devin. He half-joked it sounded like an urban legend from a forgotten culture. Maybe one of the Chinookan myths from the region's tribes. That night, he texted me a name. Kura. She who watches, not a god, not a demon. Just an idea that grew teeth. I didn't reply. Then came the dreams. I'd find myself trapped in a room, made entirely of mirrors, each one reflecting a slightly different version of myself. Some older, some younger, some bloody, one smiling wide with all black eyes. I'd wake up gasping, unable to move, still seeing my own face in my bedroom window even when the blinds were shut. Desperate, I visited the local museum of indigenous culture. An elderly woman working in the back room heard me asking questions. She looked up slowly when I said the name Kura. "She's not supposed to have a name," the woman whispered. Names give shape, shape gives hunger. I asked what. Kura was. She was once just a story. A lesson to children. Don't stare too long into still water or polished obsidian. Don't become obsessed with yourself. But the settlers, they made her worse, gave her identity, drew her eyes, wrote her into books, made mirrors common. Now she's everywhere. I asked how to stop her. You can't. Once she sees you, you begin to change. At home that night, I covered every mirror with towels and duct tape. Even my phone screen, even the microwave. But something had already started happening inside me. My memories grew warped. I'd hear footsteps when I was alone. I'd feel watched, even with my back to the wall. I stopped recognizing my own voice in recordings. And worse, I began finding photos on my phone that I never took. Photos of me sleeping. Of me standing in front of the bathroom mirror, eyes black and smiling wide. The final note arrived in my refrigerator, taped to the inside of the door. The one who summoned her wanted you gone, but now Kura has chosen. She no longer sees the difference between you, her, I don't know who summoned her. A jealous coworker? A former lover? Some forgotten enemy? Does it even matter? Because now, I watch her too. I no longer sleep in my bed. I sleep in the mirror. The apartment on Hawthorne is empty now. Renters report strange reflections, objects moved at night, and notes appearing on fogged glass. Museum records mention Kura. Only once in a 1911 field notebook. They speak of a woman in the mirror who does not blink when you do. They say she is the punishment for obsession, for vanity, for the sin of too much looking. The entry ends with a final line, scrawled in frantic pen. Do not look at yourself after dark. Do not remember her name. Kura remembers you. They told me West Texas would be dry, quiet, and uneventful. They were right. But no one warned me that quiet could rot, that silence could have teeth. I moved into the apartment off Avenue Q in my sophomore year at Texas Tech. It was cheap, too cheap. Cracked walls, a rusted fridge, and a single-bedroom unit with a window that faced nothing but dead grass and a barbed wire fence. The wind out there never stopped. Always whispering, sometimes howling like it was clawing for attention, but it was not the wind that began to breathe. The first time I heard it, I was half asleep, low, ragged, wet breathing just beyond the glass, rhythmic, human. I froze. Didn't look, thought it might be someone drunk or homeless. I kept my head down, heart pounding, until dawn. The next night it returned. Same sound, same time. 3:13 a.m., but when I yanked the curtain open, there was nothing. Just the brittle grass swaying beneath the moonlight. I called campus security. They did a walk-by, found nothing, no footprints. No cigarette butts, no signs of life. I started keeping pepper spray by my bed. Then the camera. I propped my phone in the windowsill and set it to record overnight. The footage was 6 hours of black static and wind. But at 3:13, the curtain suddenly lifted inward, no hand. No breeze, no figure. And yet I could hear it. A deep, labored wheeze. But the window stayed shut the whole time. That morning, I noticed something stranger. My hairbrush was clean. Too clean. I'd just used it the night before, but not a single strand of hair. Then the shower drain. The floor, my pillow, all spotless. I checked my scalp. My fingernails, they were ... shorter, uneven, freshly broken. I hadn't cut them. I hadn't touched them. It wasn't long before the skin around my fingers began to peel. My reflection. Looked sunken, lips too pale, cheeks too hollow. I confided in Dr. Ortega, a professor of folklore and ethnology. She listened without judgment. Her office was dim, lined with shelves of books too old to have ISBNs. When I mentioned the breathing, the camera, the missing pieces of me, she looked almost relieved, as if she'd been waiting. You need to stop sleeping near that window, she said. You've drawn its attention. I asked what it was. She leaned forward and whispered the name like it was sacred. The Hollow Man. She pulled a thin book from her shelf. Apache in origin, she sighed. Oral history transcribed by missionaries, most of it dismissed as myth. But she believed it. He is the quiet thing. The watcher who waits. He was born where silence goes to rot. He does not walk, he does not crawl. He enters where the soul is weakest, where loneliness ferments like old milk. He cannot be seen until he is part of you, until you are part of him. She warned me not to acknowledge him, not to speak to him, not to let him hear my breath. Your reflection is not yours anymore, she said. It's his mirror now. I stopped looking into mirrors, covered every reflective surface. Burned sage, hung salt lines. Moved my bed to the opposite wall. It didn't help. My fingernails began disappearing in strips. My hair fell in clumps. But the breathing never changed, always steady, like a metronome made of mucus and despair. Soon I noticed my reflection changing in ways no normal mirror could justify. Its movements lagged, then twitched ahead. Its eyes were deeper, hungrier. One night, it blinked before I did. Another night, it didn't blink at all. I finally snapped during an electrical storm. The power surged. The lights went dead. My phone wouldn't turn on. I stood in the dark as the curtain billowed inward again, and I screamed. For the first time in weeks, I acknowledged it. I shouted, "What the hell do you want?" And the breathing stopped. There was no wind. No sound. Nothing until I heard the voice behind the glass. "To finish what you've begun." I don't remember much after that. The paramedics said I was found wandering near a cotton field, naked, bleeding from the fingertips. I had no hair, no nails, no teeth. Just smooth gums and a blank stare. Dr. Ortega visited once. She wept. Sarge. She was sorry, but I had given the hollow man shape. Every piece it takes becomes a bone, a ligament, a tendon of what it will be. He was nothing before you. Now he has your eyes. She said I'll never fully come back, that I'm only half. Here now, that something still lives behind that window, whispering in a language without words. Sometimes I catch my reflection blinking out of sync again. Sometimes I hear the breathing from inside the mirror. The apartment on Avenue Q was demolished, but workers reported mirrors cracking during demolition and strange fluid dripping from walls. Some say they saw a pale shape behind the glass, mouth wide, no eyes, just wet breathing and the faintest hint of a smile. I did not intend to live in this place. But when you find yourself on the precipice of an unraveling life, when rent and time itself become a burden, too great to bear, decisions are made with no regard for reason. It was in such a desperate state that I moved into the crumbling tenement building on the outskirts of the Loop, a forgotten relic of an era where steel once kissed the sky, but now sags under the weight of neglect. It had been years since anyone had cared for the building. The walls were damp, the floors crooked, and the air stank of mildew and decay. Yet the rent was cheap, far too cheap, and as I signed the lease, a thought slithered in the back of my mind, an odd feeling I could not quite place. A sensation I would come to regret ignoring. The first few nights were uneventful. The only sounds came from the groaning structure itself, the whispers of the wind seeping through cracked windows, the distant hum of traffic like the low drone of some cosmic beast. It was the quiet I needed, I thought, a reprieve from the chaos I'd left behind. But then, on the fourth night, it began. At precisely 2:13 a.m., a strange melody pierced the silence. Off-key, as though played by someone who had forgotten the purpose of music itself. It was a tune that seemed both ancient and foreign, its rhythm unsettling, its notes curling into my mind like the fingers of a hand long dead. I could feel it seep into my very bones, as though the sound was not merely a disturbance, but a command. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The source was clear. It came from apartment 6B, directly above mine, but apartment 6B had been unoccupied for over a decade. The last tenant, an elderly man, had vanished without a trace, and the apartment had remained sealed off ever since. For the first few nights, I convinced myself that it was just the wind, some creaking pipe, or the eccentricities of an old building. But the tune was precise, recurring every night at the same time. The melody was maddening, and with each passing night it wormed its way deeper into my thoughts. I could not escape it. It was as though the sound had found a way into my very mind, insinuating itself into my dreams. Sleep became a stranger. I would lie awake, staring at the peeling ceiling, waiting for the moment when the whistling would begin. And each time it did, I felt my sanity loosen just a little more. Desperation set in. I could not let this obsession fester unchecked. I began to research the history of the building. I learned that it had once been a thriving place of residence, home to families and professionals. But, like everything else in the city, it had fallen victim to neglect, and now stood as little more than a monument to decay. The management had long since abandoned the tenants, and the walls seemed to be slowly closing in on the few souls still trapped within. But what of 6B? What was it about that apartment that drew me in so completely? And what of the sound? I took to walking the halls at night, listening for the eerie whistling. There were no answers to be found, only the deepening mystery. It was as if the building itself had become a labyrinth, a twisted thing that refused to let me leave, that sought to bind me with its secrets. Then, one evening, while scouring the old building's archives in the decaying basement, I stumbled upon something strange. A set of blueprints for the building? They were yellowed with age, the edges torn and brittle, but there, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten papers, was a detail that had not been there before. A crawlspace behind the walls of apartment 6B, a crawlspace that didn't appear on any of the building's official plans. My curiosity now completely consumed me. I broke into 6B that night, using a crowbar to pry open the rotting door. The room was, as I expected, unoccupied, abandoned to the dust of years, a tomb-like atmosphere hanging heavy in the air. Yet, it was the walls that called to me, the way they seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I moved cautiously through the apartment, my eyes scanning for any sign of the source of the whistling. And then, behind an old wardrobe, I found it, a hidden door wedged into the plaster. With great difficulty, I pried it open, revealing a narrow passage that led into the crawlspace. It was there, in that suffocating, musty space, that I found a pile of skeletal remains wrapped in tattered cloth. They had been there for decades, their bones bleached by time and rot. But what froze my blood was the journal, a small, leather-bound book tucked between the remains. I opened it cautiously. The handwriting was faded, almost illegible, but one passage stood out, dated 1932. The watcher beyond the walls sees all. He waits in silence, and I fear he is coming for me now. He takes shape from what he consumes: flesh, thought, memory. It began with whispers at the window, whistling in the night. He whistled first, now he whistles back. I dropped the journal in horror. The air in the crawlspace grew heavy, suffocating, as though something ancient and vile were closing in around me. And then I heard it, the whistle, louder, now closer. The same off-key tune, winding itself through the air like a curse. I fled the crawlspace, stumbling over my own feet in my haste. But when I reached the safety of the main apartment, I stopped. I stood in the doorway, heart racing. Listening, the whistling had stopped, but in the silence that followed, I realized something far worse. The breathing was back, slow, deep, ragged. Right behind me. And now I could hear it whistling along with me. It is said that the watcher beyond the walls has no form, only the shape of its hunger. That it waits, feeding off the whispers and the silence, slowly drawing you in. The building at 6B still stands, empty and decaying, a hollow shell. The last tenants left long ago, but the building remains, a monument to an ancient hunger that refuses to die. I left Chicago soon after that night, but I know, deep down, that the watcher never truly leaves. It lives in the spaces between breaths, the cracks in the walls, the empty places where silence rots. And now, when the wind blows through the streets at 2:13 a.m., I hear a strange, familiar whistle. There are few things more chilling than the quiet of a rural Maine winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, that clings to your soul long after the frost has thawed. The town of Bangor is a place where secrets settle like dust, where the thin line between the mundane and the unknown is sometimes so delicate that it seems to vanish altogether. But even in such a place, I never thought the past could come for me so forcefully. Yet, it did. I had been living in the crumbling house on High Street for little more than a year when the first telegram arrived. The old house, a relic of a time long past, seemed to lean into the weather, its crooked silhouette a constant reminder of the many lives that had passed through it. The house had belonged to my mother, whose memories of it were stained with shadows I did not understand. She had left it to me when she died, prematurely. At the age of 52, an age she should have never reached, considering the circumstances of her death. But that is a story for another time. The telegram arrived on a cold afternoon, wrapped in the crisp formality that only telegrams can evoke. The paper was worn, edges fraying as though it had been passed through many hands before. Reaching mine, I could not explain why I felt so uneasy as I unfolded the sheet of yellowed paper. The text was typed, stark and impersonal, but the words they carried well. Those words were anything but impersonal. The telegram read, "I see you, Evelyn. The hour draws near. Beware of the shadows at the window tonight. George Caldwell." George Caldwell, my mother's former stalker. The man who died in 1985 after years of harassing her to the point of madness. The police had found him in the woods, his body mangled and contorted, his eyes wide open in a permanent expression of horror. The rumors had been many, but the official story was that he had died of exposure. That had been the end of him. At least, I thought, but this telegram told a different story. A story I dared not believe. I showed the telegram to no one, knowing the reactions it would elicit. My friends would think I had lost my mind. The authorities would laugh, dismissing it as a cruel prank. But I knew the truth. There was something deeply wrong with this. Something otherworldly. That evening I kept the telegram in my pocket, and though the sun had long set, I found myself staring out the window, dreading something to appear. The shadows twisted unnaturally against the pale light of the street lamp, but nothing came. The night, as always, was still. The telegrams did not stop. One came every few days, each one more chilling than the last, each one signed by George Caldwell's name. Each one recounting events before they happened, small details of my daily life, events that had yet to transpire. Sometimes it was a trivial note such as, "You will spill your coffee on the floor at 10:47 a.m. tomorrow." And then I would find myself doing exactly that. Other times they were more ominous. "At 2:13 a.m. tonight, you will hear a knock at the door. Do not answer." George Caldwell. The knock came precisely at 2:13 a.m. I couldn't dismiss it any longer. I began researching Caldwell's past, retracing the steps of a man who had haunted my mother's life and ultimately her death. The more I dug, the darker the history became. Caldwell had been obsessed with an occult society, one that believed in the power to manipulate time, bending it, twisting it, turning it into something that could be controlled. These were not idle beliefs, for it appeared Caldwell had been involved with them far more deeply than anyone knew. The society's records were buried, mostly burned or lost to time, but I found enough scattered fragments to piece together the truth. Caldwell had been taken. Not dead, not truly. The occultists had managed to tear him from the linear flow of time, trapping him in a non-linear existence, a curse, really, where he was neither alive nor dead, but something between. He was forced to wander, stalking across generations, appearing in the lives of those linked to him, to the woman he had once obsessed over, and now, to me, I realized then, with an awful clarity, that I wasn't the first to receive these telegrams. His previous victims, women who had been tied to him in some dark and twisted manner, had all experienced the same horrors. Each of them, one by one, had succumbed to their own paranoid, terrified fates. Caldwell's curse was to never be free, but to reach out, to touch the minds of those who were connected to him, to stalk them beyond the grave, forcing them to relive his torment. And now, I was the next dot in the coming weeks. The telegrams grew more desperate. The warnings grew more insistent. They began to describe things I had not yet seen, places I had not yet visited. The oppressive weight of it all drove me to the brink of madness. Then, on the evening of January 9th, 2023, the last telegram arrived. "I see you. I am coming." You will see me soon, and when you do, you will understand. There is no escape. George. Caldwell. I tried to flee. I packed what little I could and drove out of Bangor, thinking that perhaps by leaving, I could sever the connection. But the telegrams continued to arrive and delivered. Each one slipped under my door, each one signed with his cursed name. His presence, it seemed, was everywhere I went. The last telegram I received was dated February 3rd, 2023. It simply read, "I see you. You see me. There is no more time." I have not written anything since. My mind is fractured, my body a hollow echo of what it once was. I can feel him, Caldwell, in the room with me, watching from the shadows, his eyes upon me. Perhaps it was never just about him. Perhaps this is a curse upon the very fabric of time itself, a force that transcends the linear nature of existence, pulling me along with it into a whirlpool of dread and madness. Perhaps I am not the last. I can hear the ticking of the clock now. 2:13 a.m. There is a knock at the door. I have no choice but to answer. Those who read this will find no solace. There are no answers. There is no escape from the binding force of time. I am but a single piece in a much larger puzzle, one that is never solved, only lived. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone else will find themselves caught in its threads. But for now, all I can do is wait. As he waits, I see you.